Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And once again, we are so happy to be joined by the curious, the charming Bridget Todd. Welcome, Bridget.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the C adjective theme.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. We were talking a little bit before we started recording, but I guess here comes the loaded question. How are you doing, Bridget?
Oh, I'll just say I've been better. For folks who don't know, I live in Washington, D.C., which you might know is a crime-infested hellhole. No, just kidding. It's actually a lovely place to live. But President Trump has taken over our city's police force and has unleashed the National Guard and a slew of federal agents into the city. When this first happened, for whatever reason, it was centralized right on my street. Which wasn't my favorite. It still persists. Every day is a new surprise, I guess, that he has in store for us. If people are listening, are following what's going on in D.C., one of the biggest, I'll get on my soapbox right now. The reason why it's happening in D.C. is because D.C. is not a state. D.C. has what's called home rule. So we have some ability to make decisions for ourselves and sort of for like our local leaders are able to make some decisions for us. But everything that happens in D.C. is at the pleasure of the president and Congress because D.C. is not a state. And so the reason why Trump can send not just the National Guard to D.C., but also take over our police force is because D.C. is not a state. And so advocate for statehood for D.C. The only reason why this is happening in D.C. and no other place in terms of our police force being taken over by Trump is because D.C. is not a state. So advocate for D.C. statehood now. I don't have an elected official that I can call about this. Call for me and advocate for the full self-determination of the people of the District of Columbia. That's my soapbox.
It was a good one. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And we're both so glad you're okay. And good to have you as always, even if the topic you're discussing is it's one that makes me very angry. And actually, this is a sad state of affairs that we live in. But as I was discussing before we started recording, I'm going to this big event, Dragon Con, this weekend. And every year I go, I think I might die in a mass shooting.
Oh,
Because that's just the world we live in. And part of what you're talking about here is it's awful enough that happens, but it's also awful enough that so many people in power are so quick to blame somebody else, anybody else, other than what is actually happening and what we could actually do to prevent things like this.
Oh my God, Anney, you and me both. If I am in any kind of a big event, people who know me in real life know I can't get comfortable until I'm like, okay, exit there, exit there. Like I need to know where the exits are. I'm not comfortable until I do that. And as you said, in this country, I hate to say it, it feels like we have just decided we're not going to do anything about the real cause of mass shootings, which is, guns.
Right.
So then we have to start scapegoating things and trying to blame these issues that are non-issues on why we have shootings. And unfortunately, in today's internet landscape, that thing is the existence of trans people. I know what you're thinking. I don't know how trans people are linked to mass shootings. Well, you would be right because they are not linked to mass shootings, but that does not keep trans people from being baselessly blamed for any kind of mass shooting, mass tragedy, or mass instance of violence or bad thing happening by very loud voices online.
Yes. And this has happened several times, correct?
Yes, it is a constant thing, and it's a kind of identity-based disinformation that I see over and over and over again. I would be willing to bet that folks listening have probably actually seen this play out at one time or another if you spend any time online. There is this image of someone with blonde, shaggy hair holding a rifle that often circulates online that claims to show the perpetrator, who commenters will say, oh, this is a trans person who was mentally disturbed and they're the perpetrator. But it's actually a very well-worn image of Sam Hyde, who is not trans and is actually an extremist comedian and YouTuber. In fact, in 2023, fact-checker and journalist Bill McCarthy described that when he sees a mass shooting, his heart doesn't just sink for the victims and their families and communities. His heart also sinks because he knows, just from doing it for a long time, that it means that other people who are not involved will be baselessly and falsely accused of being the killer. Their pictures shared all over the web by social media users. In a piece called Mass Shootings, The Other Innocent Victims, he sheds light on this, where he talks about a mass shooting happening in Nashville, where Hyde was misidentified as both trans and the perpetrator. He writes, shortly after police said that they had responded to a shooting, I opened Twitter and ran a simple keyword search, Nashville shooter identified. According to dozens of results, the city officials had already singled out the perpetrator. It was a transgender woman named Samantha Hyde, the Post claimed. So this, again, like, if you spend any time at all online when there's some sort of mass instance of violence, this image of Hyde is probably, you can probably picture it. Like, I can picture it. I see it every single time. And, this person is very familiar to fact checkers at this point because of all the different variations of an image of this person showing up. But it's been this long-running hoax that initially originated on 4chan as kind of like a meme.
Ugh. I do not like that. And the thing is, it has such a trickle-down impact because I'm not hugely online, but I'm aware of all of this through, like, news, in quotes, I guess, news sources. And it has horrible impacts on the people who were not involved at all.
Yeah. So it's really not just Nashville. In the shooting in Texas, a photo of an actual trans woman named Sam, a different Sam than the one I was just talking about, circulated on social media claiming that she was the perpetrator. She actually had to post a picture showing that she was alive and well because, as we know, that shooter was killed by police, right? And so, I mean, just imagine not being involved in a shooting. That trans woman, Sam, was like, I don't even live in Nashville, right? And so just imagine having to prove to people online that you were not involved in something that you had nothing to do with. None of these people were actually the perpetrators or even connected to the incident at all. But that does not stop these claims from going viral and harming innocent, actual trans people. And then furthermore, kind of creating this false impression that trans people are violent or dangerous just based on nothing. Like, the facts very clearly do not back that up. And so the way that people are able to scapegoat and fearmonger around just the existence of trans people and then somehow link it to violence is really, it's not just harmful for the trans people who are targeted, it's harmful for everybody. Like, it's just a very harmful, dangerous climate.
Yes. And, when we have these narratives around trans people in our politics that are so painting them in such a way as if they're all pedophiles or something, like, it's just ridiculous. These attacks are horrible. They're not backed up by facts. And we know the trans community faces so much violence. And this only makes it worse. And you have an incident that happened kind of near you where we saw this play out, right?
Yes. Yeah. So this brings me to this horrible plane crash that happened earlier this year. There was a great piece about this incident in Wired called "A Trans Pilot Was Falsely Blamed for a Plane Crash. Now She's Fighting the Right-Wing Disinformation Machine," that was published earlier this summer that really sheds light on this issue. So I wanted to shout them out. So back in January, there was a deadly plane crash where I live here in DC, where a helicopter crashed into a plane. Both of them landed in the Potomac River and 67 people died. It was a hard way to start out the new year, and it just was a really dark time here in DC. However, it also became very dark for this woman, Jo Ellis, who is a transgender National Guard pilot, who was falsely blamed for causing this crash. Now, to be super duper clear, Ellis was not involved in this crash in any capacity whatsoever, just was not involved. However, days before the crash happened, she'd published this pretty good essay about what it's like being a transgender pilot. That alone was enough for right-wing influencers, some of which who have millions of followers across the internet, to baselessly accuse her of being responsible for this crash. So in the days leading up to this crash, she wrote this piece called Living to Serve, Living as Myself, a Transgender Service Member's Perspective, where she describes growing up in a family of service members and joining the Virginia Army National Guard in 2009. In her piece, she described sending an email to her command and giving them notice that she intended to start transitioning under the then current in-service transition policy. And she says she was met with a lot of support from her team. It's clear in the piece that she's trying to sort of push back on some of these well-worn myths about how trans people get all this free stuff and that, you just join the military and the government pays for everything. She actually describes paying out of pocket for all of her trans-related care. So after her piece was published, just days later, the crash happened. She describes waking up to a friend warning her that she had been named online as the pilot who killed all of these innocent passengers in this deadly crash. At first, she's thinking, oh, this is just some weird, isolated claim. Somebody must have mistakenly connected me to the crash because of this essay. I described being from Virginia. This happened really close to Virginia. She's like, oh, just a mistake. Then she gets on Facebook and she sees lots of messages, both from friends basically being like, are you alive? Are you okay? I see that you were involved in this crash, as well as hateful, really transphobic messages from people saying that they thought that she had been involved in this crash. So again, I can't quite imagine what it would be like to go to bed just a normal person and wake up being at the center of this horrible tragedy that you weren't even involved in any capacity.
What I really hate with all of this conversation is that was part of the point. They love taking an incident that they know they may have some liability in, because we know what was happening with the Department of Transportation and the FAA. We knew things were happening and things were slowly falling apart. We could see things falling apart before this happened. And if they, just like with the shooters, any of the shooters, when they're like, oh, this is not going to be good for our side. So what we're going to do is put in as much disinformation and misinformation as we can, and also give them a villain that we have already used to capitalize on traditional families in order to get our narrative out there. There's so much to this, and it doesn't matter if they're wrong. They've got the perfect victim, and they've got someone to be the villain that can only help perpetuate their platform, right?
You're exactly right, Samantha. And I mean, that is exactly what's going on in this case. When initially, I remember the day this crash happened, and I also, when I'm not making my podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet, I also co-host a local daily news podcast called CityCast DC. So I was reporting on this story, and I will never forget, literally the day it happened, you had administration officials essentially blaming DEI. This was when we didn't even know what the cause was. And so they were so confident getting up on television and being like, oh, the problem was DEI. And then back in March, the administration spent $2.1 million on an actual official investigation into whether or not DEI policies were causing all these recent safety incidents with airlines, right? And so I don't think I have to tell anybody that there's just no credence to this. You don't need $2.1 million to study this. But also the way that even before, I'm not kidding, there were still bodies in the Potomac River when Donald Trump was getting on TV talking about this being because of DEI. And so you're exactly right that they've just created this scapegoat that, it's horrible for trans folks and the trans community, but it's also horrible for everybody, because when we're trying to somehow pin deadly plane crashes on diversity, we're not actually looking at what causes the deadly plane crashes. So the planes are less safe for all of us because they're like, oh, it's, how trans people are always causing plane crashes. And then the thing that is actually causing plane crashes is going unexamined. And so it's a real problem. And I just hate that it's been so effective.
In my head, this is it's such a bad, when the queer community are involved, I'm it's because they were dressed too good. Like they're showing off their fits. You know, that little trend that's happening on TikTok.
Yeah,
like they're showing their outfits, and so they were being too distracting and caused this plane crash. And that's what goes in my head.
I mean, that's essentially. It's like a joke, but like that's essentially what they're saying sometimes. It's so silly.
It's just beyond. This is the part I think you're coming back to, and I want to make note of, that there is no real liability in this disinformation / just straight out lies, because it plays out on social media.
Exactly. So we're starting to see a little bit of movement there, and I'll talk more about that toward the end of the episode. But yeah, because it's all happening online, it's happening in a space where real damage can be done, and then real accountability can be elusive. And so that's exactly what happened in this case. Right-wing influencers just started boosting lies that Ellis was involved in this crash when she wasn't. On Twitter, Matt Wallace, who has over 2 million followers, put out a post saying that a trans Black Hawk pilot had written a letter about depression and gender dysphoria the day before a deadly crash. So if you actually read Ellis's piece, she talks about how she was depressed, but when she was young, before she transitioned. Her piece is all about how, I feel like I have a supportive community, both professionally and personally and socially. Her piece did not make her sound like she was an unhappy person. It made her sound like she was a very happy, solid person. So even that is a lie. But he went so far as to suggest that it might have been some kind of a, quote, trans terror attack. That post blew up and got almost 5 million views before he deleted it. Then, Ann Vandersteel, who is a pretty well-known QAnon personality with a huge following online, jumped in and pushed the same false claim. She did eventually post a retraction. And of course, it would not be an episode about transphobia without mentioning Elon Musk. Musk's own AI chatbot, known as Grok, falsely named Ellis as the pilot, which only made the rumor spread faster. So before long, Ellis was actually trending as the second most talked about topic on Twitter, with more than 90,000 posts about her, speculating that she was involved and that the whole thing was some sort of a, quote, trans terror attack. She had to put out a proof of life video on social media to reassure her community that she wasn't dead, and also just as an attempt to push back against these lies.
I hate that she had to do a proof of life video just to save her name. But also I wonder how many people are like, this is AI. Like they still refuse to believe it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. So we know that in that crash, there were no survivors. And so I almost wonder if someone saw a video of her being like, well, there were no survivors and here I am. They're like, that's not real. That's AI. And that just goes to show how f***ed our digital media landscape is that some people, when confronted with the truth that does not align with the reality that they want to be true, will always reject it, right? They can meet her in the flesh and it's like, oh, it's a body double. It truly does not matter. So I will say, after she posted her proof of life video, Matt Wallace, one of the people who initially claimed that she was responsible for this accident, did post to say, oh, I saw that video. Ellis is alive and well and not responsible for the crash. He shifted the blame to another account called Fake Gay Politics, which has since been suspended on X, saying, this is apparently the first account who reported what we now know is false. It seemed credible because Joe Ellis wrote an article calling out Trump's trans military ban only a few days ago. I have to point out that in this post where he says, oh, I got it wrong, she wasn't responsible, he of course also misgenders her because he just can't help himself. Like he has to, even in a post where, I don't know, he should maybe be apologizing for baselessly accusing her of committing a trans terror attack to millions of people. He should maybe be apologizing to her. No, he's like, I gotta misgender her on the way out also.
Right. I mean, it's definitely gotta treat them less than human type of narrative from him, of course. Wallace, which I can't stand him anyway, but Matt Wallace in himself, he can't really actually show any compassion.
Exactly. And I think how this claim moved online, I think really shows what an effective social media and media apparatus folks on the right really do have, where these claims maybe start in more fringe pockets of the internet, like 4chan or some random extremist blogger's Twitter page, but then they quickly get boosted by right-wing politicians, media figures, and then bleed into more mainstream media outlets where they just sort of become part of people's consciousness. Like, I would be willing to bet that because that picture of Sam Hyde, where it misrepresents Sam as a trans woman responsible for this attack, I would be willing to bet that some people out there think, oh, that image is of an actual trans person who committed a horrible atrocity, even though it's not, because it's just like part of the ecosystem now.
Yeah, and I mean, that's part of the damage here is even with these retractions, which, I mean, I guess I'm glad I did them, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, yeah, sure, okay. But at that point, the damage is kind of done. Like, somebody has already been pinned for this. Some people who digested that information might not ever see the retraction. Like, the damage is kind of done. They might have that already in their head. And Ellis was someone who experienced this kind of thing.
Yeah, she described essentially overnight, going from being unknown in public to being somebody who felt like they could not even go out in public for her own safety. She told the New York Times, quote, "My life was turned upside down at that point," adding that her employer sent armed bodyguards to protect her family and that she started carrying a loaded weapon as a precaution. Forever on, I'm known as that trans terrorist. And so, as you both were just saying, these claims, it can be hard to get accountability because they're happening online. And even though Matt Wallace did retract his claim that she was involved in this, I have to imagine that he did that because Ellis did not take this sitting down. She actually fought back. And so we've talked about this on my own podcast a lot, but when online right-wing influencers and figures spread lies about people, we're starting to see more and more the people that are targeted by their lies are filing defamation lawsuits against people who spread demonstrable, harmful lies about them. And that's exactly what Ellis did. She filed a defamation lawsuit against Matt Wallace in April, saying that he was behind a destructive and irresponsible defamation campaign. The lawsuit against Wallace, filed in the U.S. District Court in Colorado, was a way for Ellis to seek damages for the harm caused to her reputation, privacy, and safety. Ellis said that Wallace has not yet counterfiled, and her lawsuit was filed by the Equality Legal Action Fund, which is a group of volunteer attorneys and advocates who help members of the LGBTQ community fight online defamation. And so I have to imagine that when all these people were like, oh, looks like I got it wrong and this person wasn't involved in this tragedy, as I just said to a million people, I have to imagine part of that was because they did not want to face a defamation lawsuit, which, yeah, if you lie about people in a way that can harm them, harm their career, harm their livelihood, you might actually be looking at a defamation lawsuit.
Yeah. And we have seen some cases of this working out recently. Interestingly, I don't know if you've been following what's going on with the app T.
Oh, yes, I have. Very, very closely.
Yes, but we were talking about that recently in an episode about defamation. It can be tricky, but if you can prove like this demonstrably hurt me, you can get some money from that.
Yeah, are you talking about how the women who had their information exposed by T are suing?
Yeah, well, we were talking about both because men were so angry and they were trying to sue for defamation. And it's kind of tricky when a lot of it is just, well, this is the date you went on. This is what you posted online. So it's kind of tricky. But in other cases, then the women have their information leaked and they're like, well, this is a bit.
When I was covering the T app, we were talking about those "Are We Dating the Same Guy" Facebook pages that kind of were a sort of precursor to the T app. And as you just said, men tried to sue women who talked about the dates that they had on those pages, and those lawsuits did not go anywhere. And I remember watching a press conference of these women who posted on one of those pages after the case was dropped, and they were not going to be found liable for defamation. they basically said exactly what you just said, Anney. You know, I'm sorry that you didn't like that what I said about what happened on our date was not favorable to you, but that is what happened, and that's not defamation. And I guess the court agreed.
Right. And I think the thing about these types of cases, and anything with like civil lawsuits in general, but defamations and all of this, is that it really does give an upper hand to victims who can prove what is happening. We talked about this in the Me Too episode. We just had an interview with E. Jean Carroll and her defamation lawsuits, which were like, yes, girl, get them. But like the level of proof is not as deep as a criminal case, but you still have to prove it, obviously. And it's such a tricky thing because there are so many unsure ways, and this is not as well known. Obviously, defamation and civil suits are not as well known as criminal suits. We're not like watching shows based on that, although we could. And I'm guessing like this is probably going to be one of those same things where it's kind of like, how do we proceed? What does this look like?
Yeah, I mean, it is this like tricky gray area legally. Another good example of people successfully suing for defamation were the parents of the Sandy Hook shooting, who successfully sued Alex Jones for defamation after he repeatedly and baselessly claimed that the shooting that killed their babies was a hoax, that their kids were not really dead, that they were actors, or that the parents were involved in some massive conspiracy. And they were able to prove that he actually did defame them. Also, it's such a despicable thing to do. Like, he deserves every bad thing that could happen to a person. When you actually look at he didn't just say this offhand once or twice. These people had his listeners showing up to their houses to harass them in person. Like, when you actually look at the things that he did, it's so despicable. And we also know that Dominion Voting Systems got a $787 million settlement from Fox News because Fox claimed that their voting systems during the election were rigged against Trump. So there is some precedent for suing businesses for defamation. You know, Fox is a business, Alex Jones, it runs a business, but not really a precedent for suing individual influencers who spread damaging lies about people. So I think that's what Ellis is really trying to do, trying to say, like, if a influencer with millions of followers says a demonstrably false claim about me that harms me, I should be able to seek damages for that. And I think, you know, especially for marginalized people, there should be some kind of legal recourse that prevents this. It should not just be that anybody can say any harmful, dangerous, damaging lie they want, and you just have to eat it.
Right. Right. I mean, when we look at like Giuliani, again, with Trump, even the Megan Thee Stallion recent cases, like these are really interesting. Of course, we have bigger names doing these cases, not the Giuliani case. That was a beautiful suit to see in itself. But there are so many things that it looks like, you know, this is the best solution. I say that hesitantly because it's so gross that people can't get justice in general.
Yes.
But like, I guess, you know what I mean?
No, totally. And I'm glad that you brought up Giuliani. So he was sued by two women who you probably have heard of, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, Georgia women who again, I guess I want to bring this up because it's not like he just casually offhand said, oh, maybe they were involved in vote rigging the election for Biden against Trump. The way that he said this repeatedly, the way that he like in one instance, he accuses them of passing back and forth USB files that had secret hidden votes on them as if they were doing a drug deal together. Like the way that it's not. So I just want to make clear, because some people are probably thinking, oh, well, why can't I just say whatever I want about anybody? But these were not public figures, right? And it's not just an offhand casual remark. It is baselessly and repeatedly saying very inflammatory things about somebody over and over and over again to audiences of millions. Like, it really is, when you actually look at what some of these cases involved, it's really clear that you should not just be able to do this. It really did have a clear damaging impact on the lives of the people targeted. Like, people broke into Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss's home. They tried to make a citizen's arrest while her grandmother, her elderly grandmother, was in the house. Like, that was probably terrifying.
Right. And we know a lot of this, as we started the conversation about mass shootings and shootings in general, have some, like a lot of these bases could be on the misinformation. The CDC shooting literally was based on that, as far as we know. And by the way that was just swept under the rug. Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a side note. But I'm just like, it's this disinformation is what's causing some of these awful outcomes.
We are living in a time where somebody can baselessly disparage really anybody, and like in this day and age, I'm sorry to say, that can have violent outcomes. And the fact that I agree with you, the fact that the CDC shooting happened and we all just sort of moved on from it, and the number one figure in public health in this country, RFK Jr., barely even mentioned it. I mean, I think it really deeply means that we have reached a new echelon in this kind of thing, that it could be open season on anybody. Like, genuinely, today, it's CDC workers or 2 Black women who are election workers or a trans pilot. Tomorrow, it could be you. Like genuinely, like, that is where we're at.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in this case, we are talking about the damage done to the trans community, which is already facing so much violence. And this is just exacerbating it.
Yeah, and so as I was saying, blaming trans folks for incidents they had literally nothing to do with is no isolated thing. A review of news reports and fact-checking database ClaimView shows that since 2022, there have been a dozen incidents when a trans person was wrongly blamed for a tragedy or a violent incident. So after the tragic death of Melissa Hortman, the lawmaker, and her husband, who were tragically murdered by a gunman earlier this year, Donald Trump Jr. said, quote, "The radical transgender movement is per capita the most violent domestic terror threat, if not in America, then probably the entire world." And that shooter was not even a trans person. A trans woman was initially blamed for the Trump shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania. After a shooting where 2 people were killed in Wisconsin, Alex Jones, who, like I said, really should not be lying about anybody at this point, said, "If the statistical trend continues with this tragic event, there is a 98% chance the shooting is trans or gang related." I don't know where he got that from. "If this is another trans whack job or gang shooting, it will be out of the news in less than 24 hours. And so I gotta say, this is just a complete lie. Trans people are far more likely to be the victims of crime, not the perpetrator. This is from Wired. Research shows that trans people are 4 times more likely to be the victims of violence compared to cis people, according to the LGBTQ advocacy group GLAAD. Between May 2024 and May 2025, there have been at least 26 injuries and 1 death reported among trans and gender nonconforming people, a 14% jump from the previous year. Meanwhile, claims that trans people are behind mass violence doesn't add up. Per the Gun Violence Archive, there have been 4,400 mass shootings in the past decade, of which fewer than 10 known suspects were trans. That is 0.11%. And again, I mean, trans people are already not a huge number of the population in general. So, like, just common sense would probably tell you they would not be statistically overrepresented in mass shootings. And so all of these claims linking trans people to being the perpetrators of violence are just bunk. They're not true. It's just another way to lie about this community and demonize them.
Yeah. I mean, it's the similar to the bathroom argument that there's going to be men and the trans men are men coming into the bathroom to molest your children. And we're like, what? That's never been what?
Yeah. And whenever I hear about that, when people are like, well, cis men are just going to go into the bathroom with your little daughters and creep on them, shouldn't that be on the cis men? Like, if you're saying that the problem is that cis men are gonna use this to sneak their way into bathrooms to harm girls, what a trans, like there's not a trans person in the mix in this scenario that you've painted, in this fear-mongering scenario that you've just painted out. Wouldn't that be on the cis men?
Right. Also, if we're really worried about these young girls, can we talk about child bride laws? Like, are we going to talk? No?
Don't even get me started.
Cool.
I mean, I have said this so often, and I mean it literally. We hate children. We will absolutely be like, oh, we have to protect the kids in this really convenient one instance that aligns with my political policies. But then in every other instance, it's like, those kids. We hate kids. We're not interested in protect. We wouldn't even be having this conversation about how we allow kids to get shot when they try to go to school if we actually gave a shit about kids. We hate kids. Like, we don't care about them at all.
Feeding kids, giving them lunches. Oh, dear God. What?
Let them starve. Put them in the mines. Get a job. You're
just
8 years old.
And then go ahead. Do your thing, okay?
Listen, by the time you're in kindergarten, if you don't have a job in a factory or a mine, I don't want to hear it.
I love the regressing, and we have about like the child labor laws. So like, they need to work. At 10, they absolutely need to be working. Let's bring them into the fields.
I almost feel like we're getting closer and closer to this being explicit because at least we don't have to hear the sort of protect the children rhetoric so much anymore. We still hear, I'm not saying we don't hear it, but yeah, I think that their naked hatred of children is becoming more and more on display. So at least we can all just have an honest conversation about it. We don't have to pretend that you want to protect kids when you want them to be starving in mines or whatever.
Right. Give us our batteries.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, coming back to...
Sorry, that was just my little rant about how much we hate kids.
You know how I love going on side quests in
Me
these
too.
conversations with you. But yeah, like we do, like I said, I've mentioned before about this whole level of social media and what kind of a role they are playing. Can you kind of bring us back to that?
Yeah, I mean, all of the things I've just talked about, it's all made worse when you look at how most social media platforms have really rolled back whatever rules they did have that were meant to prevent trans people being harmed on their platforms. This was something I personally worked in. When I was working for an advocacy organization called Ultraviolet, we worked with platforms like TikTok and Reddit to have them spell out that behavior like dead naming or misgendering was going to be called out in their hateful conduct policies. Almost instantly when Trump got in office, a lot of that stuff was rolled back. That was one of the first positions that Elon Musk rolled back when he took over Twitter. So like the way that we are living in a less protected landscape for trans and queer and marginalized people online, it's just sad how quickly that became the case. And, you know, a lot of these platforms, even LinkedIn, have really rolled back whatever protections they did have around this kind of harmful content and language toward marginalized people like trans folks. And it becomes an even bigger problem as algorithms amplify harmful content while platforms like Facebook and Twitter really just abandon fact-checking. Earlier this year, Facebook also loosened its rules around hate speech and abuse. And so, yeah, we're just living in a much less moderated online landscape when it comes to marginalized people, trans people, queer people. And it's a problem. And I think all of that relates to, you know, why when Matt Wallace baselessly accuses a trans pilot of being involved in this crash, not only is it amplified, but that sticks around. It becomes a trending topic on a platform, even though it's just a complete lie. And I think at the heart of all of this is really just shows how eager people are to use anything, even outright lies, to paint trans people as violent. You know, it's like they're trying to build a world where trans folks never get to just exist as themselves. Instead, they're being constantly scrutinized and held responsible, not just for what other trans people do, but even for things that have never actually happened. Like, how could you ever exist if that was the climate that you had to exist under? It just really goes to show how much people want to create a climate where these folks don't exist.
Yeah. It feels very purposeful, and it's frightening in that it is so effective. And you know, I know we've talked about this before, but there have been people in the periphery of my life where I've sort of watched them fall into this kind of conspiracy world. Well, they'll say something and I just pause. I'm like, wait, what? And I've just seen them go further and further and further down this path. And it's frustrating and frightening. And I do think that in some places it's like misinformation, but I think a lot of it is purposeful. I think they want to erase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree. And, I will definitely be following Ellis's defamation suit because I don't like the idea that the only recourse is fighting back in the courts. But I do think having there be a cost for spreading these kinds of harmful lies online would be a good thing. I think a signal that says, if you're going to get on the internet and blast a lie about a trans person to millions of people, that might be a decision that comes at a cost for you. So think twice about it. And so I think I'll be interested to see where this suit goes and whether or not it creates a dynamic where folks do think twice before they get online and lie about trans people, because they should.
Yes, they should.
I mean, you should think twice before you lie about anybody, but
don't lie.
Yes, I think that would be fantastic for everyone if people thought twice before lying online. It's fascinating. I used to have to answer the comments on YouTube under our videos, and it was so interesting to me how many times I'd be like, "Hi, I'm a real person," and they'd be like, "Oh my God." I'm so sorry.
It's so funny that you say this. I made a video, like a video on Instagram about AI, and someone left a comment that said, "Why should we trust you? Aren't you AI?" And I was like, "Oh my God, am I AI?" Like, I had a moment where I thought, I thought I had a childhood. I thought I had blood drawn, but am I AI? But if you were AI, wouldn't you think you were real? Like, it's not like AI would know they were AI. It really caused me to go down an existential tailspin. I think I'm real, but could I ever be sure?
Right. I'm thinking about the dude that got engaged to the AI, I think we talked about before. And didn't she admit she's not a real person? I think she said that I'm not real, but our feelings are real.
Yes.
Something like that.
The guy who proposed to his AI. Yeah. I mean, I think
she says she's not real, but their feelings, the relationship was. So I was like, wait.
My feelings are real.
I love this.
Oh, we're gonna have a crisis.
Yeah,
this route.
We're getting into Matrix territory. This very question became a huge deal in the Star Wars fandom a couple years ago because they introduced a droid that could use the Force. So if a droid can use the Force, then you're saying it's alive. So then what are we doing with all of these other droids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always wondered this. I mean, this is a whole rabbit hole, but I don't know a ton about Star Wars, but I do notice the stormtroopers, are they droids? Because when they get killed, it's never like my body. I'm always like, are they human? Or like, what's the deal? What's going on with them?
Well, Bridget, I could go into a long thing, but essentially, yes, most of them are human and or clones, which are also human, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they kind of have like numbers for names. Yeah, so
they're not like, when they're not doing stormtrooper stuff, it's not like they're taking off their mask and like going home to the kids and watching TV.
And most of them are not. Some of them are.
Okay.
But a lot of them are like grown quickly in a tube. So they like might not have even had a childhood or anything.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, how deep does this thing go?
You don't even want to know.
Yeah, that's not the question. That's not the question to ask.
To ask me.
Unless you got a week.
Okay.
Well, maybe later we'll come back to that. But in the meantime, always wonderful to have you on. Thank you so much for bringing this topic and for being here. Where can the good listeners find you?
You can listen to my podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet. You can find me on Instagram at Bridget Marie in DC, on TikTok at Bridget Marie in DC, and on YouTube at There Are No Girls on the Internet.
Yes. And listeners, go check out all of that stuff if you haven't already. If you would like to contact us, you can. You can email us at hello@stuffInevertoldyou.com. You can also find us on Blue Sky at Mom Stuff Podcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have some new merchandise at Cotton Bureau if you want to check it out. And we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production by iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite shows.